Good morning and welcome to the Memoir session of this year's NT Writers Festival. My name's Alex Barwick. I work with ABC Local Radio here in Alice Springs, and it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to chat with our two authors this morning. Hopefully you've really enjoyed being part of a number of the events over the course of the festival so far. I know there's just been so many different things to get along to, so thank you for coming along this morning and being a part of the Memoir talk. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the Aranda people, the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on this morning, Mbuntua, Alice Springs. And just quickly, a little bit of housekeeping. If everyone can just remember to turn off their mobile phones, that'd be fantastic. And I want to also welcome those of you who are joining us from our satellite locations via the live stream right across the Northern Territory. We're very tech savvy. We would love to incorporate your questions as well this morning, and we'll have a Q&A session towards the end of this morning. And if you would like to send in a question as part of that, please just text through your name, your location, and the number is 0475 918 400. 0475 918 400. Now I'll just talk through quickly how we're going to run the session this morning. I'll be chatting one-on-one with each of our authors, and then after that we're going to come together in conversation, and it's over to all of you to ask them as many questions as you can in the time we've got, which is about an hour. So, with no further ado, let's give a really warm welcome to our two authors, Lizzie Marrkilyi Ellis, who's recently published Pictures from My Memory, My Story as a Ngundarra Woman, and Renee Mcbryde, who's just released her memoir, The House of Lies. I just want to thank both of you for your books. Your stories made me laugh, they made me cry. They were both very, very different, but there are also some clear similarities in them, and we'll see some of that this morning. You're both clearly incredibly strong women, independently minded. You both have a great sense of humour, which comes through in your writing, and you've both got a willingness to make yourselves vulnerable in sharing your life experiences as a means for helping others to learn from those experiences. So thank you again. Well, I'd like to first introduce Lizzie Ellis. She's a Ngundarra educator, interpreter, linguist from the Western Desert. She's currently an Australian Research Council Discovery Indigenous Fellow at ANU in Canberra. And Pictures from My Memory is her first book, and it's an absolute gift that's going to keep on giving to educate Australians about her people, her culture, through beautiful storytelling and her gracious ability to straddle two very different worlds. So thank you so much, Lizzie.
Thank you.
You know, you wanted to begin just by doing a couple of thank yous.
Yes. I wanted to say, firstly, acknowledge the Aranda people whose land we are meeting on, the past and present, and just like to thank the NT Writers Festival for inviting me to come here to be part of the festival. And also I'd like to thank my brother Lohon Dusay, who introduced and edited my book, and Aboriginal Studies Press, IATSIS, who published my book, and for Red Kangaroo Bookshop in the Todd Mall in Alice Springs. They're selling my book. Thank you.
Lizzie, let's go back to 1962. You were a baby. Tell us what life was like then, everyday life for your parents.
My parents were still nomadic. They were living a semi-nomadic lifestyle. Mother, when she had me, they were wearing clothes made out of flour bags, you know, those white flour bags with the dingo, picture of a dingo on it. So they were making clothes out of that and other rags. So they'd make dresses and wear that. So she had me when she was in her 20s, and they were going between Warburton Mission that had been set up in the, I think, the 40s or 50s, Warburton Rangers Mission, and I think Ernabella was set up in 1930s. So people were travelling between, like Nganadara people, Pitjantjatjara people were going between Ernabella Mission and Warburton Mission. And then the weather station, when that set up the Giles weather station, that's where my parents were from. So my parents were still living a nomadic life.
In your book, you talk about some extremely bizarre testing that your parents were involved in with the CSIRO. Can you share some of those stories with us?
Yes, in between where the Giles weather station is now, where we get our weather from on the news, they between Giles weather station and Docker River, there was this location in the near the Rawlinson Ranges where CSIRO came out and they were testing the people. They wanted to find out how we could survive in this harsh environment, and they did a book about it, and that's where we found the photo of me on my hip in the book, on my mum's hip. My mum and her sister and her baby were both on the hips, so that's where we got the photo from. And they were testing people, our families. They test the men stamina, you know, their strength, and they tie plastic bags around their arms and make them run up and down the road to catch the sweat, I think, and test that. And Dad was one of them. He used to tell me that. And there were lots of other things. And they were collecting our urine. And Mum said they had to put urine bag on us. And I was a baby, you know, like I was, how old was I? I think a few months or maybe, yeah, a couple. I was a nina, you know, can sit up alone without help. Like, I think I was in that age. And she, one night the urine bag came off me, and so she filled it up with water and gave that. So, and they were also putting people in fridges to see how, you know, how long we could survive in the cold. So, and they were doing all sorts of weird testing.
Yeah. Lizzie, you say a number of times throughout the book that you loved school. Can you share what it was that you loved about school?
I got to love school because it took me away from, like, that was the first memory of being in boarding school at Leonora with my family, and then it was a rough life, you know, always traveling with my family. And they because when I was school age, like, I got to love school because the authority, the government and the police, they made it like we had to be at school. So I loved school.
You were pretty good at it too, weren't you?
Yeah, and I was the teachers. I was a really good student. I think I was a good learner. I think, and one of my teachers at Carolandi Mission that I went to, which is north of Meekatharra, Seventh-day Adventist Mission School. She took me to Perth, me and my cousin, because we'd been very good at school that term.
Now, I think a lot of us are probably really interested in your experience in Alice Springs. It was the mid-70s when you and your sister moved into Alice Springs to go to Yarra College. Can you tell us about that time, what Alice Springs was like and your experience at the college?
Living at Yarra College, I enjoyed being there at Yarra, and I enjoyed going to school. And yeah, the Alice Springs was new to me. It was new because I'd come in from Docker River, I used to fly in on the plane with me and my sister. We'd fly in. And
How was that?
I didn't like the bumps, you know, from the air. I used to curse the pilot, thinking it was his fault. But later on, I realized it wasn't his fault.
In 1982, you married Michael. How did your family react to you marrying a white man?
I wrote a letter to my mum and dad. I addressed it to my mum and dad, and I put a photo of Michael and I sent it off to Dock River. And I think my the nurse who was there at Dock River, Sister Pat, and we everybody at Dock River called her Mad Sister Pat because she was an English woman. But she was lovely. She really loved us. And I think she helped read the letter and told the family that, oh, your daughter's she's gonna be marrying this fella. And they showed the photo of Michael. And next minute there's a phone call and my Uncle Toby's on the phone and my dad saying, oh, he has to give us a car, you know, the dowry. So lucky for him, he had a car. I think it was a FJ Holden or something. some Holden that he had.
And they got that car, yeah?
Yes, they came in. They travelled in and stayed with us in Giles Street, where we lived at 49 Giles Street. And that Michael gave him the car.
Much of your work, particularly as a linguist and as an interpreter, has seen you straddle two cultures. What do you think has made you able to do that so successfully?
I think I've been just lucky in where I've been, like in having the education, the two-way education, not only the white man's education, but having strong parents and uncles and aunties and grandparents and brothers, older brothers and cousins who've given me great wisdom and knowledge of our culture. And also I've learned all the great wisdom and knowledge of white man's culture, that the strong one that's held me in good stead to live in the two worlds.
As a linguist, you've had to be involved in some bizarre research as well. Can you share the story with us about having your tongue painted in chocolate and charcoal?
There's I can't remember his Christian name, but Butcher. Who was that? Andy, yes. And Bess, she was one of the other one that got her tongue painted too. And Dave. Yes, so Bess, me and Veronica, I think, we, Andy Butcher is a linguist in Adelaide University. He wanted to come up because he wanted to find out about where particular sounds are articulated in the mouth. So what they did was they made us dentures first, so that they could have a connection that you put in the computer to read all our imprints from our mouth. So they did that in England, and then they came and painted our tongues first. But when Andy said, "Oh, this is what I want to do," everybody, all the linguists in Alice Springs said, "Oh, you'll never get anybody here to agree to that," but they were wrong. But
what did it taste like?
Oh, it was very the chocolate was good. So what they did was they paint your tongue, and you have to keep your mouth open. So they paint it, and you keep your mouth open. Then you say the word, and then you have to make sure you keep your tongue down so it doesn't smudge the imprint that you've already created. And then they stick a camera in, a little thing that takes a photo, and then it feeds it into the computer. So yeah, it was quite weird, like the CSIRO carry on.
Full circle. Finally, I just wanted to ask you, how much did you consult with family and friends about what went into your memoir?
I didn't consult any of my family and family. All friends. I just took it upon myself to put who I wanted in the book, and I made a judgment call myself. And I think a lot of us writers do that. Am I right? Yeah. So, and my brother Laurent, to say, who edited, he read a lot of the stuff, and he was, nobody, we had to, one thing that I had to leave out was saying that I worked at Coles in the supermarket packing shelves, and he said, no, you can't put Coles in there because you're something about liability or something, I don't know. Yeah, they got all these weird rules, and you learn all these things when you write a book about what you can't and can put in. Yeah.
Lizzie, we're going to leave it there for right now. I'm sure there's a lot of questions that people want to ask you, but thank you so much for having a chat with us so far this morning. Lizzie Ellis.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce our second author this morning, Renee Mcbryde. Renee has worked in community services for 15 years. She currently works in child protection for the Department of Children and Families. She moved to Alice Springs in 2015 with her husband. She has 3 boys, 5 and under. Yep. And last year she ran a marathon to raise money for the Alice Springs Women's Shelter. Her first book is The House of Lies, and if you haven't read it, you will need tissues. Renee, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me. A bit closer. Yeah.
The House of Lies lays bare the heavy weight of carrying family secrets, murder, sexual assault, domestic violence, and finding your own identity through all of that. Renee, let's go back to the beginning. The opening chapter of the book is you as a 6-year-old on the phone to your father who's in jail. You didn't know he was in jail. You find out from him in that moment that actually he is in jail for murder. What happened after that? Your mum and your nan had not let you know that that was going on. Talk us through, as a 6-year-old, what followed from that moment.
Well, the family just kind of went into a big flap because this secret that everyone had been kind of holding was out there and in the hands of a 6-year-old. So they were like, oh God, what are we going to do? And I think everybody just tried to come together and think, what are we going to tell her? How much does she know? What are we going to do? So there was a bit of panic, and my grandparents kind of took the reins on that and steered what my thoughts were around that. And I think they really wanted to shelter me a little bit around how bad things were, because I was such a young little girl. So it kind of went into chaos, but it was the marking point, I guess, of being enveloped into the family secret.
And so this would be one of a number of secrets that you would carry for a large part of your life. What kind of an effect did it have on you, carrying that secret, on your relationships, on your friendships, on your family?
I think finding out this big secret about my family when I was 6 really just shaped the rest of my childhood and my identity, because I think children by nature are very honest. So to have to withhold such a big secret from such a young age just meant that I had this huge weight on my shoulders of like, don't sleep up, don't tell anyone. And that just shaped me going forward. Everything that I any friendship I developed or any relationship, I knew I couldn't be ever completely myself. So I kind of shaped this persona.
Ruby Tuesday.
Ruby Tuesday. And my grandfather gave me that nickname when I was born, because I was born on a Tuesday and my birthstone is a ruby. And initially Ruby was a bit of a character that, because I was almost idolised by my grandparents, I was never responsible for anything that I did that was naughty or anything like that. So if there was drawing on the wall or bad behaviour, it wasn't Renee, it was always Ruby. And then that identity took a much greater meaning once I knew the secret, because it was more of a face that I would put on for people, knowing that I couldn't be entirely Renee. So I had to just kind of draw a line in the sand and be like, when I go to school, I'm Ruby, and keep that together so that I didn't slip up.
Your nan was clearly an absolute rock for you, a second parent. How did your world and your mum's world change when she passed away from cancer?
When my nan died, just both of our lives shifted. My mum had never really been the parent up until that point, so when my nan died, we both really had to find our feet in having a more traditional mother-daughter relationship. So everything as we'd kind of known it crumbled, and we really had to find our feet in this new parent-child relationship.
And it also saw a whole new revelation of secrets, didn't it?
Yeah, my grandmother, she had been holding all of these secrets herself about this kind of secret life that she'd escaped from in Tasmania with a husband and children, and that we knew nothing about. So her dying with those secrets, just, that cross to bear, I think just really struck me as something that I never wanted to kind of repeat, because I can't imagine the weight of that, just dying with all of that on your chest.
And that left your mum really rethinking her identity, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it was, particularly my mum and my grandfather really struggled, because the woman that died was not the woman that they knew for all of their lives. So that was really difficult for them. But for me, it didn't change my perception of her. And I still have that childlike perception of her, I think, too. So, but for those two, it was a big struggle.
Renee, I want to talk about your past relationship with Ben, which you talk a lot about in the book, which goes over a number of years. At the beginning, it seems like a very healthy, young love, and then it slowly deteriorates into a verbally and then physically abusive relationship, highlighted profoundly in a trip to Thailand. Would you be happy to share what happened in Thailand?
Yeah. Well, in Thailand, it became very physical. Our relationship turned from being emotionally kind of destructive at some points to physically abusive. It really was the kind of turning point in our relationship, and set a kind of, I don't want to say a benchmark, but a low line. But it became par for the course in the relationship. Once the relationship kind of meets those lows, I think it's very easy to keep going back there and then even surpassing them later on. So yeah, that night was the first time that it was a really physical and violent and very bloody turn in our relationship, and yeah, that changed the course of our relationship going forward.
When you were in that relationship, was it hard to see what was really going on?
I think so. I'm a generally pretty positive person, so I always like to see the best in people, and I certainly did that with Ben as well. But I was at a really low point after a number of other things that have happened, had happened in the story, in the book, in my life. And so I think I just kept trying to think that if I got through that, then I could get through anything. And I think the perception of a violent relationship or an abusive relationship, one that people think that's quite a misconception, is that it's constantly violent and constantly abusive, and that's not true. There will be an incident, and then it's like a vicious cycle, and that comes back, and there'll be apologies, and things will be normal, and things will be really great again, and then it will slide back. So at the time, I wasn't aware that I was in that cycle, but now that I am a social worker, it's obviously pretty apparent that I was going around and round in that circle.
And I know you said when you were writing it, you were writing and saying to yourself, Renee, why didn't I get out there or there?
Yeah, it was
hindsight
incredibly
for you.
frustrating. Look, there's so many emotions when you're writing a book that you really have to put yourself back in and feel again. And yeah, there were times where I cried when I was writing about my nan's death, even though that's so long ago, and that was quite a shock. But then the stuff that I was writing with Ben, I just felt so annoyed at myself constantly. Like I could have gone then or then or then, and yeah. But hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it?
You touched on it then, but writing this memoir for you, was it a question of reliving so many of those painful moments? Was it cathartic to do so? Was it both or something else altogether?
All of it. There's such a joy in writing and finding the right words to convey a situation or a moment in your life so well that others can feel impacted by it, even though that they weren't there or it was so long ago. So I think it is a really cathartic process. Once I signed it over to the publisher, I literally did feel like that belongs to them now, almost. And yeah, so there is a sense of separation from it once you finish writing. But yeah, it's my life, so there's so much, there's joy and sadness and anger and regret and remorse and all of those feelings, and it's great to be able to get it all on the page and feel like, yes, that's how it was.
Now, you've told me that you didn't keep a diary when you were little, but it's extraordinary the detail of so many of these events, some of which happened when you were very little. How did you remember them all so well?
I think I've always been blessed with a very good memory, and I think that's got me by in a lot of things. Even studying at school, I never had to work as hard because I had a pretty good memory. And just, yeah, being able to just doing some exercises to kind of put yourself back in that moment and try and relive it helps with those memories. But also just because I had to kind of find out all of these truths so in little increments along the way of my life, I held on to so many bits of information. So I think it was a coping tool to cling to as much information as I could, and that served the book well in retaining those memories.
And as I asked Lizzie, did you consult family members at all in putting together the memoir?
No, I didn't. I think I don't know if this is an odd thing, but I didn't tell anyone I was writing a book until I'd almost finished writing the book, because I wasn't sure that what it would look like at the end. So, and I think I have shared this with you, but I then had to explain to a lot of friends and family, because I write for Mamma Mia and a mummy blog and things like that, and I had to really explain that actually the book wasn't about motherhood. It was a little bit more serious than what I'd written before. So yeah, there was a lot of, hey, I've written a book. No consultation, yeah.
When we move to a conversation, I am going to ask about your family's responses to the book, but something interesting that came about for you after it was published was that strangers started writing to you and sharing their deep, dark secrets. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and I think it's such a great privilege for people to be able to feel that they can write to me and reach out and share their stories, things that they're struggling with that perhaps they haven't told anybody before. I find it really touching that I can have that connection with someone through the page. So yeah, and I've heard lots of wild stories. Yeah,
can't share anything with them. Well, they're secrets for those people.
Do you know, I did have a young girl write to me this week, and she had been sexually abused by her father from the age of 5, and she wrote to me and said that she was working through telling people about that, but really found my book impacting because she could see things from the other side and see that she didn't have to be defined by what came before. and they were her words. And that really impacted me. And she's, you know, in her 3rd year of psychology and doing amazing things, and I felt so impacted and privileged.
Had you anticipated, or had anyone warned you that that might be the outworking of publishing your memoir?
Oh, it came up probably with my publicist, because she was like, once they find out you're a social worker, they might want to share some things with you. So it kind of came up, but I think that's an amazing thing to be able to have come from the book. So I don't mind.
Renee Mcbryde, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're going to move into conversation now, and we really welcome your questions to either of our authors, or a question to both. And I just wanted to begin by asking you both how your families have reacted to your memoirs, especially since there wasn't a lot of consultation. Lizzie?
One of my nieces read the book, and she's been telling all the funny bits of the stories to family, so that's one good thing. And yeah.
So has she come to you and said, oh, I love that story about...
Yeah, she's read it. She's read lots of stories, and she said, oh, I didn't know that happened. Oh, I didn't know about that. And, you know, because we don't tell them these sort of stories as we live our life. So it's good for them to know. And she was telling story to the other children, other members of our family, about our, you know, especially about the one of my uncle that I told you at the library.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. There's one of my uncle, Toby. He scored a second wife, and and I used to go and stay, go to his camp, and stay there nearly all day, just being a, you know, busybody. You know, I just wanted to know what it was like. Oh, uncle, I'd never heard, you know, seen this before. You know, a man having, you know, a close family, mine having 2 wives, and I wanted to know what was, you know, going on. And my mum and dad my mum would have to come and, you know, take me home all the time. So my family, you know, they read the book, my nieces, and telling Uncle Toby's grandchildren about that story, and the other families, and they were all in stitches laughing and all the other funny bits.
Renee, what about your family? How have they reacted to The House of Lies?
Oh, I think surprisingly everybody has reacted pretty well, and has been really supportive for the most part, which was, I wasn't sure how they would react. I just let them read it and see what happened, and yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised, I guess. Yeah.
That's good. Your mum?
I haven't spoken to my mum for many years, so but I don't imagine she would be entirely pleased. But it wasn't a consideration so much because it was my story, and I really tried to focus on that and not make it about her story or my dad's story too much, all about my own perceptions.
And I understand you also don't know what your dad thinks, or if he's even read it.
No, I don't know. I don't know that he is much of a reader, but I anticipate that he hasn't read it for now. Yeah.
Okay, does anyone have a question they'd like to ask?
Renee, I'm just wondering how old you were when you told people your secret, and for the first time, and how that came about, if you're comfortable sharing that.
I didn't really share a lot of my secrets at all until I really told John. I don't know who's read the book until I told my husband before we were married. And I just began to slowly share with people who I felt like kind of stepped through that circle of trust. But not until my mid-20s did I really start kind of sharing it and possibly owning it. And then there was a few more shares once I realised that the book was really going to be a book, and I thought, oh, there are some people I need to chat to and let them know a few things. Yeah, so.
Over here?
Renee, did you speak with Kris about the book at all? Or Ben? Ben, sorry.
No, I don't keep in contact. I kind of have some idea about where he's at in life, but I didn't feel that it was necessary to consult with him, and I hope that he's in a happy place himself now. So, but no, I didn't feel it was necessary.
You've changed some of the names in the book.
I did change
his
some.
name?
I did change his, and I changed a few others, a few of the school bullies' names and things like that, just because I think that people have moved on from those places that they were, or those people that they were, and I just wanted to give them a bit of privacy for those things, and didn't want to paint them out. Although, having said that, some are quite recognisable. I've had many people contact me and say, is that person that person? I thought, oh, well, obviously I wrote it well enough that they were recognised. So, yeah, so some names have been changed, including Ben's.
Lizzie, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind to talk a little bit about how you said that you were able to live in the two worlds.
Yes, I'm able to live in two worlds because, as I said, I was born at the time, in the book, I was born at the time of first contact occurring in my family's country. The white men had just arrived, so our families were still living the lifestyle, traditional lifestyle, but it was just starting to change, the early stages of changes. So because of that, they were still strong in language and cultural stuff. They were still passing that on to me, but because of the white man's, when we travelled west, my parents travelled west from the Rawlinson Ranges, where the Giles weather station is. They went west because I have families from the Western Desert area, the Gibson, Victoria, I think it's Sandy Desert. So large area. They travelled down to the Gulf, first down to Warburton, whereas others went to Ernabella and Popanya, and others went to Jigalong when they emptied out that area for the rocket testing. So my families ended up going to Popanya. A lot of my father's brothers went to Popanya, and then my father and two of his other brothers, they went south to Warburton, and they went towards the goldfields area. That's where we ended up having my parents had. There's 6 of us in the family, and there's me, and they had different. They had Myra at Warburton, me and the Rawlingsons, Myra at Warburton, Nerida at Cosmo, Leslie at Leonora, Peter at Mcbryde, and when we were living at Wiluna. So they travelled that way, and that's why we were in the school, and then we came back. But that's why we still had the two cultures and were strong, because my parents had gone into the areas where there were more white people, and we lived there, and then we came back to the area that I'd been, where there's less white people, so it was still strong.
Just before we get to the next question, you talk about Jukala a lot in the
Yes.
book, and getting back
Jukala,
home.
Yes.
And I'm guessing that a lot of us maybe haven't been there, and I'd love to hear you describe.
Yeah, Jukala is a small community in near Docker River. It's west of Uluru, and people went west, and then they kept coming back because they went to Warburton, and then when the the Giles weather station was set up, people tend to go and stay there, but then they weren't allowed to stay there. They had to keep away because the staff were there just to do this. And our families lived around that area. But then from Warburton, people start moving back with in 1974 we were in Wiluna, and that's when self-government was handed back to Aboriginal people, and the Seventh-day Adventist mission school that we closed that down, they closed that down, and that's when we ended up coming back to not Tukula. Tukula wasn't there. We came to Warburton, and people had moved. By the time we came to Warburton, people had moved to near Giles weather station. They were living just nearby with just a tank, of water in the bush and no houses. And then they worked with the governments to set up communities, and some communities were set up in before Tukula. Tukula was set up in the 1980s, and when that was set up, there was about 200 people who came back to that area. But now it's gone down to 60 because a lot of the old people have passed away, and many of the younger people now live in the surrounding larger communities in the Ngana lands.
When's the last time you've been down to Tukula?
Oh, Tukula, I was there last year when I was on field work from ANU.
Who else would like to ask a question? Second row.
Renee, it was mentioned that you've got 3 children under 5. I'm wondering if you've thought about how you're going to decide when to tell them what's in the book.
I have thought about it, and I think that I really am very focused around preserving their childhood and making sure that they have as long as they can just enjoying the simple things, in contrast to my own experience. So I think when I feel like they're old enough will be probably when they're getting in their teen years, but like Alex said, I have 3 boys, so I don't know the likelihood of getting them to sit down and read my book is very high later in those years. But one day they might sit down and do that, yeah. But they're very aware that I sit and write, and they often emulate that by sitting and writing their own books.
Wasn't one of your kids telling you the other day that you obviously take too long because they just whipped out a story in an afternoon?
Yes, my eldest Harry sat down at a lunchtime and wrote The Driving Frog. That's sure to be a bestseller. And he said to me, "I don't know why it took you so long. I wrote this in a lunchtime." So.
Are there any other questions? Here we go.
Oh, a question for Lizzie. Okay. Oh yeah, power. Thank you for the story you've told. Can I ask you a question which is not about social history, it's about language history. And what changes do you see in Ngārdadara from the 1970s to now in the way people speak?
A huge difference. That's the work that I'm doing at ANU. It's in communication, multimodal communication, Western Desert Verbal Arts. And the way we speak has changed. Before white men came, we spoke, there were different styles of speaking. There's different ways of speaking. There's the oral, there's the gesture, there's the sand story, there's the smoke messengers, all those different, diagrams, symbols on the rock surfaces, diagrams in the sand. When people, women used to go and they'd do a circle around a honey ant, hole. Everybody knows about honey ants. When a woman does a circle around with her foot, that and another woman come and they see a circle around that hole, entrance holes to honey ants, that means, oh, that's so-and-so did that circle, that's hers, she's going to come and dig it. So those sort of things. So old ways of portraying messages, and people smoked country, lit fires as they left the main waterhole when they went to another waterhole, and as they were entering, and that's the way people knew who was going where. So smoke was an indicator of which families were where. But so looking at from old ways to now, to now with Facebook and telephones and all that. So looking at the whole from the beginning to now, and speech styles, speech registers, all the respectful registers, like sister-in-laws, when they talk to each other, they use the command form. They don't use the command form like give me the cup. They use the future tense. Will you in the future give me that cup? So there are many changes. Even young people, we get young people to tell stories, like I did the other night, sand stories, and they did sand stories in the sand, and you hear when they're telling stories, you hear English words now and then with their endings on it. And we got these young girls to do the same sand stories but on iPads, and then you lose a lot of the sound symbolisms that you'd hear when you're telling stories in the sand. If people were here the other night who heard the sounds that I was using, the non-wordy sounds, so a lot of the young girls weren't using. So as new technology comes in, you lose those. That's a big one that I noticed. The those sound symbolisms. They only belong to when you're on the sand telling a story. It won't. But you gotta really be with it in your mind to continue to bring every bit of what belongs in the sand story to the new method.
Often through the genre of memoir, an author is sort of seeking to show how he or she's been affected by an experience, and then how that has then profoundly changed their view or how they see the world. I wanted to ask both of you, is that true for you in each of your memoirs? And what would be some of those learnings through sharing what you have and what you've written? Renee?
I think that certainly wanting to get your point of view across and learn from the story that you've experienced. I think maybe I'm not answering entirely the question. It was a long question, Alex.
Yeah. Sorry, it was too long.
Shorten it. Yeah.
It's okay.
I guess, you know what?
No, you go.
Well, I think we often hear that, memoirs are about sharing a particular experience because you've learnt something profound through that experience. And I guess what came through for me was for you finding your identity. Is that accurate? Or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what for you do you think was the most profound thing you learnt through those experiences that are in the memoir that you were wanting to share with people?
I think what I wanted to share with people the most is that we don't have to be defined by our past, and that you can move forward and use those experiences to benefit your life. I think that I honestly would say, though, all of those experiences that I had were challenging, that they have made me the person that I am, and the person who I am I really like. And I think that that's a huge kind of point to get to after so many challenges in life. And I think mostly that's what I wanted to convey, that you can be met with all of these things and still come through the other side. And it's a great privilege that I can write and share my story and have those kind of messages from other people who are still on the other side, but really desperately trying to come through these challenges. So I really wanted to share that, because I think, particularly in my work, it's conveyed a lot that if you have these challenges, especially in younger life, or that you have certain types of parents, that there'll be this cycle of poverty and a cycle of misfortune, and that you don't have to be part of that cycle, and that you can create your own destiny.
Lizzie, I know part of the reason why you wrote your book was because you were sick of repeating yourself, but I hate to tell you, it's so great. I think people are going to just want to keep asking you questions.
Yeah, I wrote the book because it dawned on me that from the questions I was getting from people continually, how's, wanting to know, aspects of my culture and our life, and how we live our life, and our languages, and because of that, that's why I decided to write the book. Not only that, but also it was for my family. It's for my daughters, and for my granddaughter, and for the future generations, for them to have to have it there in the book as an insight into my the life that I lived and the life that my parents and grandparents lived. So just a history of how we lived our life in it was at a pretty unique time. It was very unique.
I'm really sorry to say that is all we have time for this morning, so please again join with me thanking our two authors, Lizzie Ellis and Renee Mcbryde. Thanks, Lizzie. And I also just want to thank you guys for coming out this morning, asking great questions and being part of the NT Writers Festival.